What is the rationale or explanation for attending to the emotional side of the game? In one way, isn't it ironic that here we are talking about the mental game, but essentially the mental game's as much about the emotions here of top golf, or indeed the golf everyone experiences. The matter of emotions is typically not an area that is acknowledged by, golfers in general. Yet they're there, and if you don't attend to them, the danger is that they can sweep you away and take over. In a way, the word emotion, E-motion, the thing about these intense experiences is that they tend to move you in some way. There is a motion inherent in the word emotion, and the problem is that acting out of some of those impulses can produce very undesirable effects which you subsequently regret. And in a way, what we're looking at is this idea of identification and disidentification. I remember many years ago reading the wonderful book, Michael Murphy, Golf in the Kingdom. My mother gave it to me when I was 15. I didn't really understand it, but I came back to it a few years later. And in the appendix, the first book to be mentioned was one called Psychosynthesis by Roberto Assagioli. And I'd never heard of it, but I did a bit of research and found out that there was a psychosynthesis training in London. And so I duly headed up and ended up doing a 5-year training in what is essentially a wonderful body of skills that takes a look at psychology less from the perspective of unhealthy or people with some sort of mental problems to looking at it in terms of the potential for higher states. So it was about the synthesis. And one of the central principles that Roberto Assagioli talked about was we are dominated by everything with which our self is identified. We can dominate and control everything from which we can disidentify. And that's why this exercise that we've done is a move from being dominated to one where we have more agency and control. And that is exactly the purpose of the exercise that we've done. And in a sense, what it is inserting yourself between the emotion and the associated impulses, the motions that go with emotion, and the action, introducing a moment of reflection. And that's what the place of the center, the place of disidentification, is essentially about. What that means is that in terms of the mastery of the emotions, there's a number of stages that we go through. The first is to move from the suppression or repression of the emotion to an awareness of these powerful emotions and the associated drives and instincts. So you go from unconscious to awareness. And inherent with that is owning it and identifying with it. The second is the stage of disidentification to gain some sort of control and ability to potentially store the energy, because they're powerful forces in these emotions. The next stage is that of transformation or sublimating the emotions, working on them in that way, so that the final stage is one where they can be expressed effectively and constructively rather than negatively. And one of the real dangers is that the whole area of emotions are viewed somewhat negatively and derogatorily. But just to illustrate their role, it's not as if some of these emotions are not inappropriate. There's a lovely poem by William Blake. I was angry with my friend and I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe and I told it not, and my wrath did grow. So the danger of not dealing with it is that the emotions don't go away. They can become quite problematic. Just to illustrate the role that emotions can play, there's the great Irish poet W.B. Yeats talks about a state of mind that is the result or triggered by anger when, he says, a man is fighting mad. Something drops from eyes long blind. He completes his partial mind. There's a psychologist, Colin Wilson, that was looking at this area. What he talks about is that when a man is galvanized by some crisis or ecstasy, the full moon suddenly appears and he feels in control of his real powers. So the intensity of some of these important occasions that are associated with excitement or ecstasy, or the crisis or the intensity of the closing stages of an important game or round, that there's always the possibility that the partial mind that Yeats talks about may be transcended into what Colin Wilson calls the full moon. And this is, in a way, a result of the transformation or transmutation of these important emotions triggered by an event or occasion. And this is an area that we'll be looking at in a lot more depth. It's very central to the approach of the golfing body-mind, is these altered states that absolutely can be triggered by these intense emotions when worked with in a controlled and focused way. So the emotions are by no means bad. They are more to be understood and disidentified from, so that some agency and some work can be done on them, quite possibly to transmute them in a very positive direction. The emotions are a huge area of importance to the mastery of the golfing body-mind, and that journey to becoming better than you ever thought you could be.